All right, guys, welcome back. So what we did in the last class is we were talking about the rows of textures here. So if you remember, the first row of textures we did, I was just having you take brushes and you were like stamping with the brushes, right? Last class, what I did, and you can notice the difference in the textures. I was painting with a brush using gradient controls, right? Remember, in a couple ways that we did that is I took the brush itself and I would paint from dark to light. Another thing I did is I would then darken the color and I would come back and adjust the opacity of the brush by hitting my keyboard. Remember, Donovan, 0 to 100, right? Because I remember I hit it once and you're like, wow, it goes half speed, right? So that's really important, is to be able to use the brushes that way. The other thing we did is I showed you guys how to use the gradient tool last class. So with the gradient tool, I was able to go over and take a gradient and take two different colors down here. Remember, we could stroke a gradient and then we could put it on top of part of our color and then we could adjust the layer option. So there's a couple of different things there to think about. You can paint in a texture with the brushes, and you can also manually paint it in by hand, which you're going to get a better effect, because look at these three textures I sort of have right here, right? See how those read a little bit softer and a little bit easier? Part of that's because of that gradient flow. Okay, and then what I want you guys to do today is, if you go back up on the blog site, okay, our goal is to finish all of these. So the last four, I want you to paint from one of the textures I put up on the blog. So if you come up here, I put some texture samples for you, okay? So this one's going to be a little bit hard to mimic, but with some time and practice and effort, you could get to that. And what we can do today is we might take a look at the wood one and try to create something similar to the wood. Now, you don't have to, our goal is to get as close to the wood as you can. If you can't get it 100%, that's normal. You can only do what you can do, right? So what we're going to do is, remember, if you click on this image and you get the image blowing up like that, right? There's a difference. Because I had some students last class who are like, why is my image so small? Well, because you didn't click on it right. Remember, and if you're on Google or any other browser, you always get a displayed image first. To get to the real size image, you have to click on it or hit visit page. So if I click on this, it makes it larger. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to say save picture as. I'm going to put it back on my desktop. So I have my folder that I've been working in, Dart 135 here. I have exercise 2 textures. I'm going to hit save. It's in there. Okay. So now I can scroll down. I might decide to do this image as well. Okay. So I'm going to hit save picture as. It goes to the same place. Boom. It's there. And let's say let's do the brick wall. Okay. We'll hit save picture as and hit save, and we'll put that in there. And then maybe we'll go for this type of wood grain, which is a little bit more complicated, but I can show you some cool steps into producing that. So let's right click on that, save picture as, save, there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to close the blog up, and what's cool is that now I could come over here and I can open up those images and I could use them to guide me. So do you remember I showed you a little tool called the color picker? And the color picker has, remember I told you if you're in brush mode, let me show you for example. So let me go to File, let's go to Open. I'm going to go over back to my folder right here, and I'm going to go to Exercise 2. There are my textures, right? So let's go ahead. I'm going to select this wood texture, hit Open, and it brings it up as a separate file. That's how Photoshop is programmed. I'm going to select all, copy. I'm going to come back here to my texture paints. I'm going to zoom in for a minute, right? I'm going to go to the bottom row. I'm going to hit Paste. Boom. I'm going to bring that right over here like this. And if you want to make it a little bit larger and it's a little bit easier for you to see, that's fine. Okay? So now that's done. So this is where you should be. You should be able to have this. Now, one of the advantages of us painting and working in Photoshop is we could steal color and color swatches and local color from objects that we're looking at, our reference. So all I have to do right now is, if I come over here and if I'm in brush, okay, let me grab a decent brush. Remember I told you I like these brushes right here, 25 and 175. I paint with them quite a bit. So I'm going to grab like number 25 here. I have my brush. So you'll notice as I go to paint right there and I make a mark, I have red. So I don't want red. Okay. And just as a reminder, because I notice a couple students doing this, they go, oh, I'm going to Command Z. Command Z only allows you one go back. Okay. But if you have more than one and you need to go back, you have to hit Alt. So if I hit Command and then Alt and then Z, it allows me to go back to multiple steps. Okay, and actually in Photoshop you can change that, and you can add in, it depends on the type of memory your computer has. So you could go into your computer and tell it to go back like 40 or 50 steps, which sometimes when you're digitally painting isn't really a lot of steps, but that's what happens. So the cool thing is I have my brush. What I need to do is click on my color right there, right? Because Eric was just asking me about this. And so I don't want to guess that color. I could come down here and look at orange and then move this around and try to guess it and be like, hey, that's somewhat close, maybe like that. Look, I can just once I bring the cursor off of that, see the color picker? Color picker comes up, I just touch right here. Boom, there it is. That's the color that's right there. Okay, so what's cool is now I could come over here. Okay, I'm going to build 3 layers, and I'm going to label these. I'm going to call it base. Okay, I'm going to come up here. I'm going to call this one mid, and then I might call this one top or high. I'll call it top for today. Okay, so I have 3 layers. I'm going to come back down here. I have my other layers up here. I'm going to go ahead and, I'm not going to worry about them because I'm not sure what's on some of them because I've been demoing. I'm just going to zoom in on this because this is just introduction to painting with Photoshop, right? So what I'm going to do is come over here to my base. I'm going to hit M for marquee, and I'm going to fill that square. So if I go edit, and then I come over and I can go to fill, foreground color. Or another way that I could do it is I could also come back over and paint it in by hand, right? So now you might notice, bring up your color picker again. If that's the local color there, you'll notice, see what happens when I hit right here, down a little bit? It jumps a little. Do you see that? So sometimes colors bounce around a little, and they fade and they change. So what I like to do is I'm going to grab down on that corner, grab that color. I'm going to come back here, go to my brush. I'm going to grab my fuzzy brush. And now I'm going to come in and brush in some of that color in the corner like that. See how I did that? You won't notice on the monitors, it's barely showing, but I just adjusted a little bit of the orange down there. I'm going to come over here, go back, bring up your color picker, go up here. You'll notice that color is a little bit lighter in that corner. Do you see that? When I touch there. So I have that. Now I'm going to come over and lightly brush in a little bit of that lighter color on the side there. This is going to make your texture start to feel a little real, because if it doesn't feel real, it's going to feel very plasticky, because plastic is always one local value all the way across it. I'm going to come down here in the corner again with color picker, touch that local color, and it changed a little bit. I'm going to come over here and paint in a little bit more dark. So that right there is starting to help me quite a bit. Okay, that gives me the base foundation for what part of my texture might look like. And then I'm even looking at this texture, and I noticed, look at right here in the middle, it's even a little bit brighter orange right there. Do you see that? So I'm going to touch that right there, hit that, and I'm going to come over here and throw a little bit of that sort of orange in the middle. And then I look at my swab, and I'm like, hey, that's pretty cool. I might come over and just, swab a little bit more and blend in some of this. Now you'll notice I did a cool little trick there. I'm in brush mode right now, right? I'm in B. Look at what happens when I hit Alt. See that? I'm not having to bring up the color picker, am I? So I'm in brush mode, I'm in paint mode right here. See that? If I hit Alt, it brings me the color, the eyedropper. So I could just come over here and touch whatever I want now. I don't always have to go and pull this up and hit, okay, I want this color. I have the ability to make some quick changes very effectively, right? By just hitting Alt on my keyboard. You get used to it after a while. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is let's work on making some of these strands going across. That's going to be a little bit of the hard part, is to get that sort of fibrous feel in there. Well, to get it, we don't want to do it on the same layer, right? We want to do it on a different layer. And I'm going to teach you sort of a cool technique that I call minimizing. Okay, minimizing. So what I'm going to do, let me select the mid layer. Okay, minimizing is a technique I use when I make something photoreal. So when I have to do a photoreal painting, here, let me show you. I don't think I ever showed you guys any of my work, but I do a bunch of different stuff. Let me show you a painting that I did. Phil's Art Portfolio.blog. Usually I don't keep this link up. This is a link of my work that I send to producers. So if I get called to work on a job and they go, hey, Phil, send us your portfolio link, what I do is I just come over and I just send them this link and then I turn it off. Okay, so if you look up here, if I click on, let's say, part of this image right here, let me zoom in there. See how photoreal that is? Because there's different ways of painting. One way of painting is this way called photo bashing. Photo bashing is when we take parts of photos and we paint into them and blend them, and then we blend them all together to create worlds and so on. So some of this stuff that I painted, what minimizing is when I paint it on a separate layer or at a larger DPI, and then I transform it and minimize it down, because then it scrunches in the detail. Does that make sense? And when I scrunch in detail, it makes things look more realistic, okay? So here, I'm on a separate layer, right? I'm going to do one of these little strips here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over, I'm in brush mode, I'm going to hit Alt, and I'm going to touch that color. You see that? It's going to pick up that dark color. So what I'm going to do is switch over to one of the grainy, rough brushes that I gave you, okay? So if we look at this one, all right, hit deselect. There, do you see how that looks right there? Okay? I just did that real quick, right? I just pulled down. I selected a brush. I didn't do anything fancy. Okay? This is what minimizing is. I did that larger. It's on a separate layer here, correct? If I hit Control T, I can scale it down, and I could put it in here like this. And I could even scale it up. I can make it a little bit wider. And you see how that looks like it could be one of the wood grain pieces, right? But if I look in and I zoom into my piece, what is that wood grain doing? It's going in dark to light patterns, is it? Right? It is. So that means, okay, remember this other little cool trick I showed you? If I want to, this is on a separate layer right now. Those of you that screw this up will screw it up because you're painting it all on the same layer. It's going to happen. That's just what happens. But since this is on a different layer, what I can do right now is this. Remember, select all. I hit V and I hit the arrows. I've now selected that line I just made. With that line selected, I can now hit Control H to hide my ants. And what I can do is I can come over here and go a little darker on that color. And I can go switch to a soft brush like this. And I could come in, see, and I could change the flow of it. I can make it a little darker there, a little bit darker over there. You see how that works? Okay. By doing that, that's going to make my texture feel a little bit more realistic to wood. Okay. Now, I could draw more lines, correct? And I have the option to do that. But remember also last class, I talked about using, remember when I was copying and duplicating some things? I can duplicate layers, right? So right now on this layer, all I have is this line, right? So watch what happens. If I hit Command-All, copy, paste. Okay, that, hold on. V. Okay, that didn't work. Let me back up there. Hold on, let me back up a minute. Command-H, Command-D-select. Let's try it again. Command-All, copy, paste. All right, and that didn't work either. I'm getting an empty layer. What's going on? Let me come back there. See, that's selected. Command-All, V. It's there. Copy, paste. Okay, might be the recorder. Sometimes the recorder messes with my computer memory. It wasn't doing it. So look, I just copied and pasted that on another layer above. You see that? Remember the transform tool I showed you? Control T. Why not just squash that line in? Now if I squash it too much, it'll flatten it, right? So I can put another wood texture over here, like that. But now it's a little straight. So if I go back to Control T and I right click inside the box, it has all the functions of the transform tool in there. One of the functions in here, I have distort. One of my favorite ones is this one right here, warp. If I hit warp, it allows me to grab parts of this and sway it out a little bit like that. See that? So I can sway out my texture a little to one side. I can grab that dot, bring this one over. I can grab this dot, bring that over. I can hit enter. And see, now that doesn't look like the same texture. It's changed a little bit. So what I can do is now I can start building the stripe patterns that I have here. I can do it on a layer on top. Make sense? So now I just have to keep coming in. So I'm going to merge these two together so it's on one layer above. right? So now look at all these thin little lines over there. So I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to go back to my brush. And some of these other tools I gave you, some of these brushes, this one's really great right here. 25. See, it has the brighter and then it fades off. So what that does, watch what happens when I go to draw with this thing. It's putting a gradient in there. So if I do it like this, sideways, look at that. See that? It has a dark to light gradient. That's half the battle of what I'm doing already. So, but on this brush, it only does it sideways, right? Like that. See that? But that's okay. That's on another layer, right? I just put it on another layer. That means I hit, if that layer is selected, look, I just hit Command T. I can rotate that guy in. I can bring him down here. I can scale him down and make him a little thinner. If I want, I can make him wider. I can do whatever I want with him. I can get him to fade in like this. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, yeah, that's still a little too straight for me, right? So I hit Control T, which is, I'm going to transform part of that. Okay. So I hit Control T again. Remember the Control T options. If I right click inside the transform box, I have scale, rotate, skew, distort. Let me show you what they do. If I go to skew right now, skew allows me to grab a corner and stretch out one end, right? Maybe I want to make it thick to thin. Okay. All right, let's go to distort. Distort allows me to grab one side and do this with it. See that? So I can distort it that way. And then I could also come down. Perspective allows me, if I grab from one corner, it'll pinch it to another corner like this, which works great for something in perspective when it's at its side. But that's not what I want to do. What I want to do right now is I want to go to warp. When I get into warp, I might grab part of that corner. I might pull this one out here. I might pull that in a little bit more like this. Do you see that? So now I'm getting a curve on it. By the way, these little extensions here, they're known as Bezier curves. When you get that little bar that comes out. So if I come down here and I touch here, see, I can bend that out. I can make it really wide or not wide. See that? So if I hit enter, there it is. Now I bent it. But it's still a little too thick for me. That's up to you. I actually like it. I'm going to select it real quick. I'm going to use it in a minute. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit transform first. Oh, come on. Don't lag. Hold on. I'm having a delay because of the recorder. All right. Come on, Photoshop. It's locking up on me. Deselect. Try it again. Transform. There it goes. Okay. So look, if I squeeze that down, I can make it really thin. And if I even want it to blend in more, I can do this. See that? That's sort of golden right there. Opacity. Now it makes it look very real. In fact, check this out. Let's duplicate that layer. And I'm going to bring it over a little bit. But this time I'm going to raise the opacity back. And I'm going to hit transform and scale it over a little. And look at how realistic that starts to look. Because I have a dark strip next to a little light strip. Make sense? Before I changed that layer, I pasted it in my memory, Control C. So the computer knows it's in my memory. It's called my cache memory. If I hit Command V right now, look at what comes back out. I have it back in there again. See that? So now I could come over here and go, hey, I don't want to have to paint every single layer. I'm going to make this one a little bit thinner like that. So I'm going to put that one there. Maybe I'll rotate you a little bit this way. I'm going to hit select that all, select all, copy, paste, boom. Let's try that again. Select all, copy, paste. Okay, hold on. Delete. I'm having a problem. It's the computer locking up because of the recorder. So I'm just going to duplicate it. It's easier. Duplicate. Okay. Now I take that and bring that one over here. Okay. See how that's starting to work for me? I'm starting to replicate that grain feel over on the other side. Okay. So I can even come back over here. In fact, I don't want to have to, that's got a lot of duplication. Look at how thin those lines get in there. They get pretty thin, don't they? So why don't I just do this? Why don't I duplicate this guy a bunch of times? I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to zoom in and make it even thinner, like this. Make it real thin like that. Then I'm going to take that one, select all, copy, and paste that one. Why is it not pasting, man? It's driving me nuts right now. Deselect. Yeah, you know what? Maybe that's what it is I'm so far out. That's probably what it is. I'm so zoomed. There it is. It's way over there. So that's exactly what's happening. And I should know that because I'm zoomed out. So look, I'm going to put another thin line over here. I'm going to turn this one over, a little bit of an angle. So now I'm not going to do any more pasting. Watch what I'm going to do. I'm zoomed in. I'm going to take these last layers. I'm going to merge them all together, turn them off and on. See that? I'm going to let Photoshop do the work for me. So why not just duplicate this layer right now and then bring it over like this? In fact, I can duplicate it again. The only thing that sucks is you'll notice I start getting the same repetitive pattern, right? So what I'm going to do is take my eraser. I'm going to hold Shift down. I'm going to delete this first major bar. And then I'm going to move these two back over here, like that. See that? Now I've offset the pattern a little bit, so it doesn't look so much like the same. So there it is. Now I have that. I'm going to right-click on that guy. I'm going to duplicate that. Let's bring then. I'm going to bring him over a little bit more, like so. In fact, I might bring him over here. I'm going to hit Transform. So I'm looking at my texture. They get really skinny in there, right? So I might put it in about there. So I just need to keep replicating more of those lines. Now, remember when I use the Transform tool? See how I have a little bit of a waviness in there? Now that I have a big group together right here, let me duplicate it one more time just to save myself some time. Hold on, let me just make sure I have the right layer. There it is. And why am I zoning out? Oh, there it is, duplicate. Okay. I'm going to put that one over. This time I'm going to hit Transform, and I'm going to go like this. And I'm going to flip it the other way so it's a little bit different. And I'm going to turn the grain a little bit of an angle, like that. And then I'm going to merge them together. So look what I have on one layer now. I have those little stripes, right? Now I'm going to go in, and when I hit Transform, come down into Warp. Now it warps all of them together. So what's cool is I can create these little sways, like this. And like that. You see that? Okay. And I can move this guy over a little bit more. Maybe I move him up and then sway him in a little, like that. So see what that did for the wood texture? And made it look. And let's say I didn't want to use all of them. What if I only want to select? Go to your marquee tool. What if you only want to select those right there? I could select that row. We add a little bit more on the end. And then transform those. Then I'm going to warp those out. I'm going to maybe bend them a little bit this way. A little bit more that way. Might bring that end a little bit more here. And then I'll bring this base in a little bit more over, like that. So it bends. I hit Enter. That looks, see how it's a little different? And then again, I can come down here and I can drop down my opacity and lightly blend it in. So do you see what's starting to happen? I'm starting to produce that wood texture by adding those little lines and those little elements in there. Okay? So let's just go through here, but I'm also starting to gather quite a few layers, right? So let me just select all my layers right now. I'm going to merge them all in the mid, except for the big stripes. So let's try that again. Where's my big stripe here? Layer 5. There it is. So there's my big stripes. Let me drop their opacity to get them to blend in a little bit more. So I'm starting to get some similarities with the wood texture. Okay. So what I would do here is I'm going to keep duplicating some of these stripes and putting them in there. And then I'm going to come back in and start painting some of the various color changes. You'll see here it's a little bit more orange. Here it's a little bit more flat yellow and so on. Okay. So I can keep doing that and it'll start to make my textures look a little bit more real. And that's how I build it up, working with layers. Okay, so right now, let me just see what else I just want to cheat this and save myself time. Duplicate this. Okay, let me see if I can bring this layer over here. And then I'm going to make this a lot lighter. And it doesn't have to be an exact replica, but I can get pretty close just using some of the tools here. So that was pretty cool, right? That blends in pretty nice. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to duplicate that layer. I might come over here and I might bring this. Let me flip it the other way, right click on it, flip horizontally. And see that's a nice, see that little gradient, how it flows in there now? because I lightened it up. It's a little bit lighter over there. Then I'm going to come back over here. Remember I showed some of you how do you find your layers. One way to do it is you right click on the layer, you touch it with the cursor like this. If I touch that little strip right there, I right click on it, it tells me, oh, that's layer 2. And then boom, I hit layer 2. Now what layer 2 was is actually the paper. So if I right click on it again, it's the layer underneath, which is 8.4. So it puts all the layers in order for me when I right click. Oop, there it is. So I'm going to take that now. I'm going to duplicate that guy. I'm going to bring him over. See how big it is? And maybe I don't need all of that, right? So let's do this. Let me pull out. I don't need all those lines right now, correct? So I'm going to take my eraser. I'm going to make it a little larger. I'm going to erase half of them like that. I might come down here. Remember, one way to erase is to drag. Another little secret is if you hold shift, you touch here, and then put the eraser and touch there, it does a straight line for you. See that? Okay. Now that I have those done, I'm going to come back over. I'm going to fit those in right about there. Do you see how cool that is? It starts to mimic part of that texture. And I might drop down the opacity a little bit more. Get that fade in. So I have the same memory there. Select all, copy, paste, and then hit my move tool because it pastes it in the middle, like Shelby reminded us, right? So I'm going to flip it upside down. I'm going to move some of that texture over here. See if I can get it to fit in. I might make this a lot smaller, so it's really thin like that. Hit enter. I'm going to drop the opacity down a little bit more on it and get it to blend in. Okay, so give me 1 sec. Let's come here and take a look at it. So right now, look at my wood texture. It's getting similar, is it not? It's getting to that point where it's starting to look. Now, what I'm going to do now, since I've done all that, let's just look. Those are my big stripes. And then here was all my mids. So I'm going to label this. I'm going to call this mids. Okay, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to call this base. So right now, excuse me, this was actually a texture strip that I've duplicated numerous times. So look at what I have. I have mids, I have the big strips, and then I have that on the bottom. Okay. So what are some other things? If you look at that texture, you see these little shimmering highlights in there? See them in there? Let's add some white highlights to our texture then. Okay. So how do I do that? Well, let's come over here. I have a brand new layer on the top. Okay. I'm going to come in here now. I'm going to change to white. So I'm going to grab this white. Okay. And what I'm going to do is go back to brush mode. I'm on a separate layer. So I'm going to come in here and just do something really easy. I'm going to put my pen in about 80% and just go like that. Okay. Now look, that's on a separate layer, right? I can move it and transform it and put it where I want it to be. Those highlights aren't that long, are they? No. So if I hit transform right now, and I scale that guy, he's still a little bit large, so I'm going to select him. Let's transform him again. I'm going to make him a lot smaller like this. And I could come over here and I could fit him in like there. And then I could drop his opacity down a little bit. See how it sort of fits in there? Sort of nice. And then look, I'm even going to hit transform. I'm just going to stretch him down a little like so. There, now I have a cool little white highlight there. Okay. I'm going to select that, select all, copy, paste. Hit my move tool. Uh-oh. Let's try it again. Every now and then, Photoshop will not select something that's very, very light and faint. So I'm just going to move a couple of these around. I sort of like it being about right there. Okay. And then I'm going to come over and let me hit transform. Let me rotate him just a little bit more. It's like about there. Okay. I'm going to delete what's on top. I'm going to take, I still have the paste memory in there, so I hit, oops. Actually, I didn't. I had another. I'm going to select that little strip there. Select all, copy, paste. Boom, I'm going to bring that guy down. Uh-oh, look, I still have, that was a happy accident. I still have part of the other strip on top there. You see that? I'm going to hit transform, rotate it a little bit. I'm going to come over, blend him in about there. Okay, and then I could still select this guy. I can move him over, bring him down a little bit, rotate him in a little. I'm going to take my eraser, go to about 20, and I'm going to fade him in a little bit like this. So you see what's happening is I'm starting to get these little highlights replicated in my piece. So that's another thing I could do, okay? So real quick now, let me merge all my highlights together. Right now I have 3 different highlights. See them all? Clicking them on and off. Do I need to go paint those again? No. Why not take the ones I have, copy and paste them, and then bring them back over to another part of the piece and fit them in like that. Okay? Maybe I want to make them smaller. So I can select them. Oops. I have all that up there. Oh, those are my old paste. When it wasn't working in, and delete all these, so I don't want them in there. Okay. So now I have these. Let me zoom back in. Okay. It's a little too much there. So look, I have these other highlights, right? But they're a little long. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit transform and scale them down, make them a little bit smaller. Hit enter. Those look pretty cool. Those are blending in there. I'm going to hit paste again. I'm going to bring back, oh, it keeps doing the same thing. That was the old memory. So I'll select these, copy, paste. Then I'm going to bring some of those in and get them down about right there. Fade them in a little bit. I want those to fade in a little more, so I'm going to drop the opacity down, get them to blend in. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to combine these layers. Let's take a look. Let me zoom out and take a look at what I have. That texture is starting to feel like wood, isn't it? Okay. One of the last things I might do is I might come in here and brush in some other highlights and whatnot, depending on this piece of wood. Because I can see these little changes of oranges and darks and lights. So how about I do this? I'm going to combine most of my top layers here. I have my highs all together right here. Let me label them like this. There, highs, mids, texture strip, base. On my base layer, I'm going to put another layer right above it. Remember I told you the power of a gradient, right? Okay, we talked about that. Let me go to Marquee. I'm going to go ahead and drag over this whole entire texture right now. And I'm going to come over here. I'm going to select with my color picker this sort of orange here. Then I'm going to go a little bit darker like that. Then I'm going to come over and I'm going to select a lighter color like that. Okay. Now, they're a little too close, so I think I'm going to take this one and make it a little bit darker like so. I'm going to hit G, which was the gradient tool, right? Or select it. And I'm going to come over and go like this and throw a gradient across it. Now that gradient is pretty dark there, right? But what happens if I put that on multiply? Oh, it changes the way it looks. It does. What if I leave it on normal and drop the opacity down a little bit? Ooh, that's sort of cool. It adds some little dark flows to my piece, right? What if I change it? What if I hit Control T, tell it to flip horizontally or flip vertically? Ooh, that's sort of cool. I put the gradient down below. Okay, now let's turn it on and off. So I'm going to leave it on. The gradient's still there. You see that light gradient? I'm going to go to Eraser. I'm going to go down to about 30. Then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to erase some parts of it out of there, like this. I'm going to change my brush size, make it a little smaller. I can curve my brush a little. In fact, go to 100% and do like a light curve with the flow of your texture that you already have in there. See what that's doing right now? I'm putting little highlights by using my gradient. See how cool that is? Does that make sense? I'm building up. So all I'm doing right now, if I turn these off to show you, is I have a, oh, you can't see it because it's so white, but I have this light gradient that's on top right here. Hold on. Wait a minute, what happened to my dumb gradient? I'm sorry, it's right there. I'm on the wrong layer. So if I turn all these off, there's my gradient. See what I'm doing? I'm stroking part of my gradient and I'm erasing parts of it to allow the other color to pop off. So what if I do that a little bit more? What if I do it with a texture? So let's turn everything back on and look at my wood sample. Okay. Now I'm going to come back into this and let me grab a soft erase brush or a texture like, what's a good brush? Lots of different, let's try this guy. This guy's like a dust brush, one of these here. Okay, like there. So now I'm on this, right? I'm going to hit eraser. I'm going to scale this down. What happens if I lightly at like 40% sort of pull it down? Or what if I pull a couple little areas in the corner here? And I'm hitting erase. Let's see what happened. So maybe that brush doesn't seem to be working as well. Let's grab another brush. Maybe this one needs to be a little bit more. There, do you see how it smudged that whole, not smudged, it just erased that? So I can come in with this brush now and go like this. I can erase little parts. Now that's a little too bright, right? Makes the orange pop. So let me go Control Z. I'm going to go back to about 20%. And I'm just going to come in here very lightly and sort of put that little pattern right there. Do you see that? Makes the wood look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to sort of hit a couple areas, lightly touch it, hit it with my mouse a little like this. I might stroke down a little bit like this. I might go up to about 80. Oh, that's too much, so I need to go down to about 50. And I might just pop out a couple little areas of texture like so. Okay, so looking at that, that's getting pretty realistic to what I have, right? And does it feel like wood? It does. What I like to do is I leave a texture alone right now, and then I come back later and look at it. Because I've been staring at this thing right now for 30-something minutes doing a demo. My eyes are used to it. If I go over and I leave this, save your file, and do another texture here, and then I go home, and when my eyes are rested, I come back and I zoom in, I go, oh, hey, my white highlights are a little too crispy-like. Okay, so I'm going to come back over here, and I can see the highs right there. So I can zoom into my white highs, and I could go, yeah, that one's a little too thick. So I'm going to take my eraser here. Phil gave me this wonderful little fadey guy, and I'm going to drop it down to about 30. And I'm going to come in here and erase part of that tip and get you to blend in a little bit more. Let's make sure. Uh-oh, it changed layers on me. We were here on highs. There. So now if I come over here, there, do you see how I'm erasing them and blending them in a little bit on that tip? Maybe I decide to erase a little bit more off the edge. I blend that in. Maybe here it needs to fade in a little bit. There's too much of a round edge there. I'm going to fade him in. Come along. So when you have a fresh set of eyes, you come back into your work, and these little things build up, and you start to get a better feel for how it's going to work. Okay? All right. So that's me painting that texture. So real quick, let me just add in another image here. I'm going to walk you through, but I'm not going to paint it for you because it'll take another 30 minutes. I want to give you guys the rest of the class to work, and I could walk around and help you, right? So I'm going to go to Open. I'm going to grab this texture right here. Select all, copy, and let's come back over. Okay. Oh, you know what? Before I put this texture in here, I want to show you guys something really quick. A lot of you are like, oh, I'm getting all these layers. I'm getting all these textures. That's right. So here's something really cool you can do. From here to right here right now is all my wood texture, right? So if you select it all and you come down here, there's a folder. See that folder? If I put that folder right there like that, it just deleted all my layers. No, it didn't. What it did is it put all those inside a separate folder. See how they stick out? They're not in the same line as the one underneath. So now I could close this folder and I could call this wood texture like that. That's huge for me because look, I could even turn it off now where I don't have to see it. And then when I go back and work, instead of having 50 layers on the side, I now have all those layers for wood texture in there, and I can go take a look at them. So what I'm going to do is close that right now, and I'm going to go ahead, let's create another folder, and I'm going to call this folder right here, we're going to call it rock texture, okay, or crack, whatever you want to. So now that that's open, there's nothing in it. So what I'm going to do is click a couple new layers, and when I click those new layers, see how they're a little bit off to the right? They're already in there for me. So when I come to layer 8 right now, and I hit paste, I'm pasting this texture. I'm going to go ahead and transform it, make it a little bit larger. I'm going to paste that, I'm going to look at that and then paint it right here, right? So if I look over here, it's already inside my folder. See how nice that is? And if I turn my folder off, it's gone. But it's still there. Okay? So now, when you guys go to paint that texture, what's the first thing you're going to do? Phil taught you, you're going to go to the base color. The base color, you're going to swab that, is going to be, and you might need to zoom in a little bit more to see it. The base color in here is gray. So you're going to swab that gray and put it down. Then you're going to look and you notice, hey, wait a minute. See how this is a little darker? So you're going to swab those darker colors, and then with the soft airbrush, you're going to brush it in on the sides. Then you're going to go over and you're going to paint a crack separately on another layer. You're going to paint a crack in and get it the way that you want it. And then you can paint a little bit more, and then you're going to copy and paste and move those around. And then you'll develop, you'll have the base layer, you'll have the cracks on another layer, and then at the very end, you'll notice these little specular highs, right? Concrete does that. It has little parts of the surface that are highlighted. So then you'll grab another brush, you'll go to a much lighter little area, and you'll come over and you'll sample those, and you'll paint those in. Everyone good? So that's what you're going to do. I'm going to let you work for the rest of class. Okay? Your goal, where we want to be by next Tuesday, is this whole texture sheet should be done. So some of you might be a little behind, but you should try to come in. I'm going to give you a little bit of a break because I was going to say come in and work after class or on Fridays or work at home, right? Well, the school's closed Friday and Monday, so that ruins part of your scheduling. So on Tuesday, I'm going to give you another assignment, but I'm still going to allow you to work a little bit in class to get caught up. So if I zoom out of this, your total goal, you should have one row of textures that we painted with brushes. You should have 2 rows of textures that now you're painting from a gradient standpoint where you're like rendering a little bit and doing the demo I did yesterday. And then your last row should be 4 textures that you were mimicking from the samples that I put up. Any questions about that? That's your goal, okay? Because when we leave this, okay, our next assignment, we're going to start painting master studies. And I'm going to give you some different guidelines on how to paint those. It'll teach you how to use some of the other tools in Photoshop. Okay? And then after that, I also am going to do a line drawing of a prop, and I'm going to have you paint that for me. And paint some rocks and some other things. I have a ton of drawings that I have. I'm going to bring some over, and then I'm going to have you paint those. This is how you start to figure out how to paint digitally. And you guys are well on that pathway right now. The hard thing is about what we're doing painting digitally and about having our rock texture and having our wood texture in here. The hard thing is that you really have to become familiar with your layer options. And look, it's really easy like what I did here in my wood texture folder. I need to now find this layer because it's annoying me. It's on my highs. I accidentally put something on a different layer. There it is. I got rid of it. Okay? Your goal is to get to this. Some of you are wondering, well, gee, Phil, how did you learn this or how did you start? Well, the truth is way back in the day, I knew a little bit of Photoshop for advertising and graphic design back in the mid-90s. When I went to Big Idea, one of the things I was required to do is I was required to paint textures of our models for our 3D department because I was working in the art department. So I would have to do texture swabs like this. So they taught me how to use Photoshop. And I learned by a guy named Dennis Brado, who happens to be head of Sony ImageWorks texturing and painting, and he lives here in Fullerton, which is funny because he moved back from Chicago, grew up here, and he's here locally. Still works for ImageWorks. So this is what I had to do all the time, but imagine me having to do this when I've drawn a whole environment or world, and I have to go in and I have to paint textures for everything. Then sometimes at a more advanced level, I have to go back and I have to paint this texture when it's, what would it look like in the morning? What would this texture look like in the evening? What would it look like if it was at nighttime with a blue light on it? And I would have to go back and do that because in the 3D pipeline, they take this texture and you apply it to a model and make it look realistic. Okay? And then what's cool is that you can model something in 3D and you could take the wireframe of it and then you could put that texture on the wireframe and you could paint it on there. And that's how things look very realistic. That's why digital painting is such a focused area, but a huge importance to what you're doing. Okay? Anyway, have fun. I'm going to stop the recorder right here and I will render this out and I'll have 2 lectures to give you guys. Okay? Thanks.